I'm going to be discussing the Ronavirus in today's video, and I want to look at it from a couple of different angles. So I'm going to be discussing the official data. This is going to be from the perspective of government and medical data, as well as some mainstream news articles and medical journals and reports. I'll get into the mask debate as well. And finally, I'll touch on the vaccine issue that will be coming up probably early next year. So in terms of the Ronavirus data and testing, there's going to be a number of things I touch on here. Again, this is all through official government data, a couple mainstream media articles, and medical studies and reports. I'm going to show you guys that none of these categories are being portrayed accurately to the general population. So I'll go through that right now. Now, I really encourage everyone watching this to go through all these articles themselves and fact check my work and find out for yourself. It's a good habit to get into with anything you look into on the media or anywhere else. This is a New York Times article from 2007. It's talking about a whooping cough epidemic, or so they thought. Now you go through this and read, and essentially what they're telling you is that what they thought was a whooping cough outbreak actually was not. None of the people that they thought had this whooping cough actually did. And the interesting thing is that they use the same PCR testing that they're using for SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. Why they're doing this 13 years later after this incident took place, I'm not really sure. But if you read through the article, it also talks about how the PCR testing itself cannot differentiate between different viruses and bacteria infections. And one of the reasons for that might be explained in this article here through the Mayo Clinic's Research magazine, where it talks about the PCR testing and how it works by looking at genetic material, right? So it's not identifying a specific virus or bacteria, it's looking for trace amounts of a genetic material and amplifying those amounts in the test. So this is a document through the CDC, Center for Disease Control, in British Columbia, Canada, and they're discussing NAT or PCR tests. Now, the differentiation between NAT and PCR testing, all it means is that the NAT testing is made up of two different types of PCR testing. There's a DNA portion and an RNA portion. So that's a difference between those two listed. You'll see on this document here, if you scroll down to the bottom, that there's also a 30% chance of a false negative result. That we discussed in the New York Times article, there is absolutely a chance to have a false positive result as well, because it's not looking for the specific virus, it's looking for genetic material. So this again is from the CDC, and it talks about antibody testing, which is testing that is not supposed to be included in the official numbers, but some have been included, specifically in California. Now the antibody test is simply testing to see if you have antibodies for the Ronavirus, meaning that you would have recovered. But the interesting thing is that according to the CDC, there is a chance that if you test positive for the antibody test, that it could be from the common cold or other coronaviruses. So again, this is not an accurate test. So we'll move on now to the case numbers of Ronavirus, and we've already concluded that the testing does not work, but this takes it even further. So this is from Collin County, which is located in Texas. They have this video posted on their website, and they are discussing new case definitions. And they talk about how they are going to start counting individuals who have not been tested but have symptoms from specific categories. So for instance, if someone has a headache and a fever, they could be included in the case count for Ronavirus. And not only that, if that individual came into contact with 15 other people, then those 15 people would also be included in the case count, so you would have 16 new cases. And this is a big reason why the case numbers in the US, specifically in states like Texas, is exploding right now. So I want to point out that the new case definition is based off of guidelines through the CDC, the Center for Disease Control. Now, if we don't even have accurate testing and we have no idea how many people are actually infected with Ronavirus, then I think we can safely assume that the hospitalization rate is also completely inaccurate. So this is directly from the Ontario government website in Canada, and it details a number of data points regarding Ronavirus. And what's very interesting is the death statistics. So it's showing as a 7.2% death rate, but if you look at the annotation here, scroll to the bottom of the page, you will see that what they have done is they've included all deaths regardless of cause of death. So this could include things like suicide, gunshot wounds, heart attacks, or many other causes. As long as the person dies with Ronavirus, they are counted as dying from Ronavirus. So it's a very important distinction to make. So how do we really know how many deaths have occurred directly from Ronavirus? Well, we don't know for sure, but the Center for Disease Control does have an article talking about what they predict the death rate to be. And they believe it to be 0.5%, as you can see here. So there are estimates that are closer to the 1% mark, but pretty consistently here you're looking at a death rate shy of 1%. So it is a completely different number than what's being reported in the media and on sites like Johns Hopkins and others that are reporting closer to a 4 to 5% death rate, which by the way has dropped dramatically over the last couple months. So one more thing I'd like to point out here, this is from a study through Sunnybrook Hospital and the University of Toronto. So they are based in Toronto, Canada, and they were the first ones to isolate the Ronavirus. And this is a 20+ page report that they put out, and they clearly state in here that SARS-CoV-2 did not replicate efficiently in THF cells, and interestingly, human immune cell lines and primary PBMCs from healthy donors did not support SARS-CoV-2 replication. So in conclusion of part 1 of my video, we can safely conclude that the PCR testing does not work, the antibody testing does not work, the official data regarding the total case count for Ronavirus is completely inaccurate, as well as the hospitalization rate, and the death rate is well overstated. It's probably closer to about 0.5% or less. Now look, the mask thing is a huge hot button topic right now, and a lot of places in North America are now mandating masks. But they're not mandating specific type of masks. So you're able to wear a cloth mask or a medical mask or even an N95 if you do happen to have one. Now this is a paper from 2015 out of the National Library of Medicine, the NIH. Very reputable source. It's a cluster randomized trial of cloth masks compared to medical masks in healthcare workers. And I'll scroll down and tell you more about the article, but basically this is geared towards a study around influenza. Okay, so if I go down to the results, you will see here that this is absolutely amazing. The penetration of cloth masks by particles was almost 97%. The medical mask did a lot better at 44%, but you're still looking at about half of the particles going right through the mask, even in the medical mask. So this is incredible. Cloth masks are absolutely useless, and I want to point out too that the size of a virus can be up to 20 times smaller than bacteria. So if you do happen to see a video on YouTube where they're sneezing and they're showing how much bacteria is in a petri dish, that is completely different than measuring the amount of virus. Okay, so there is some evidence to show that the masks do work in stopping bacteria because they're so much bigger than the virus, right? That's just common sense. They also put in the conclusion field that they're actually recommending against the use of cloth masks, right? And there's some issues that come up: moisture retention. So they're telling you this back in 2015, and you'll see even in the keywords here is cloth mask influenza. So that kind of tells you all you need to know. The issue with the N95 masks is that if you're wearing them for a long time, you do start to get headaches. The headaches could potentially lead into taking ibuprofen, which now we're seeing a lot of evidence that the ibuprofen can actually induce a very strong response of Ronavirus if you get it. So it's a bad combination. The mask thing is a complete disaster. So keep in mind, we're talking about a vaccine for a virus with a 99+% survival rate. So again, this is from the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, and they talk about the typical life cycle for producing a vaccine, and that can take 10 or more years. Okay? So there's several phases. The final phase, phase 3, alone can take several years to complete. But yet we're supposed to believe that a rushed vaccine for the Ronavirus that's probably going to take about a year will be safe. Now, speaking of vaccine safety, this here is the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. And what it states in this act is that pharmaceutical companies that produce vaccines are not liable for any damages that are caused by those vaccines. So these are a couple examples of just how evil the pharmaceutical industry can be. This is from the National Institute of Health, and it discusses Bayer and Baxter knowingly selling HIV-tainted blood to hemophiliacs in Asia and Latin America. So they had no criminal consequences from this. And amazingly, 4 years ago, Bayer won an FDA approval for a long-acting hemophiliac drug. Unbelievable. And finally, this is out of NBC News. Johnson & Johnson knew for decades that asbestos lurked in some of its baby powder. Asbestos causes cancer. And of course, Johnson & Johnson just happens to be one of the world leaders in producing the Ronavirus vaccine, and it's ahead of schedule. This is out of CNBC. Before you guys go, don't forget to like and subscribe. Just trying to get the word out there. You know, I'm not trying to get famous or anything, but this is really important information you got to share with people.